Okay, we're good to go. All right. Thank you for your patience. I'll now call the meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can you please provide us with an overview of the meeting procedures?
Thank you. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be available to the public for playback on our website in accordance with Council Policy 3.12. Committee of the Whole is the initial venue for council review of information to ensure that council can debate and vote on issues at a future council meeting. No voting takes place on bylaws or resolutions during Committee of the Whole. This meeting is being conducted through the city's One Meeting platform, and for voting purposes, council has been provided with voting cards, green for in favor, red for opposed, and yellow for point of order. For members of the public who would like to speak during community forum, please clearly state your name and city of residence before beginning your comments. If you're participating electronically, please use the raise hand icon, and when you're called upon, turn on your camera. If you are attending the meeting in person, please come forward to the podium when the chair invites speakers.
Thank you very much. I would now like to acknowledge that the city of Maple Ridge carries out the business on the traditional unceded territory of the Katzie and Kwantlen First Nations. And first, I'd approval of the agenda, please. Do I have a mover? Moved by Mayor Rumi, seconded by Councillor Youssef. Any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. And minutes, adoption of the minutes of September the 5th, please. Have a motion to move, Councillor Schiller and seconded by Councillor Town. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. There are no delegations, so we're going to move to item number 5.
Item 5.1 is 2021-471 RZ for 22,582, 22,588, 22,596, 22,606, and 22,610 121st Avenue. It's for second reading of zone amending bylaw 7810-2021, and staff are in attendance to present the application to council.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, so this application is here for second reading. The existing OCP and proposed OCP designation is medium and high-rise apartment. The existing zoning is RS1, single detached residential. The proposed zoning is RM3, medium high-density apartment residential. The existing and proposed site area is approximately 0.7 acres. And the purpose is to permit the future construction of a 5-story apartment building with 87 market strata dwelling units. The subject properties are outlined in red as shown on the screen. And this is the surrounding OCP land use designations. And here is the neighborhood context map. So to the north, there's a place of worship and school. To the east and to the south, there's single detached residences, and to the west, there's an apartment building. So this application proposes to rezone the subject properties from the RS1 single detached residential zone to the RM3 medium high density apartment residential zone to permit the construction of a 5-story apartment building with 87 market strata dwelling units. The units would range in configuration as per the table shown on the screen, and many of the units are intended for seniors and young buyers entering the housing market, including the studio units. The application is in compliance with the official community plan. The proposed development would include lot consolidation and road dedication and would have a density of 1.85 FSR. There would be a density bonus for a cash contribution of $15 per square foot, and there would also be a community amenity contribution that's involved as well. The applicant is proposing to have vehicular access for the proposed development from the rear lane. In terms of off-street parking spaces, 96 spaces are required and 75 spaces are proposed. A cash in lieu contribution is proposed at a rate of $8,000 for each space required but not provided. In terms of long-term bicycle parking spaces, 22 are required and 40 are proposed. And in terms of short-term or visitor bicycle parking spaces, 27 spaces are required and 27 are proposed. In terms of proposed variances, there's some off-street parking variances. So the off-street parking and loading bylaw notes that a maximum of 10% of the parking spaces in any off-street parking area may be small car spaces. And the applicant is seeking to have a maximum of 25.4% of the parking spaces as small car spaces. And then another variance is the off-street parking and loading bylaw requires 2 accessible off-street parking spaces, but the applicant is seeking to have 1 accessible off-street parking space. Another variance is for the minimum building height. The city's zoning bylaw notes that a minimum building height of not less than 18 meters nor 5 stories should be considered. They're going to meet the 5-story requirement, but they're going down to 13.71 meters. In terms of setbacks, there's going to be 2 setback variances, one for the front or northern lot line to bring it down from 7.5 to 7.32 meters, and one for the interior side or eastern lot line to bring it down from 7.5 meters to 5.12 meters. The site plan is shown on the screen. And here's the north and south building elevations, the west and east building elevations, some perspectives, and a rendering. So the report recommendations are shown on the screen, that the zone amending bylaw be given for second reading and be forwarded to public hearing, and that various terms and conditions be met prior to final reading. And the applicant has indicated that they will be making a voluntary contribution in amount of $50,000 to the Ridge Meadows Senior Society towards the society's new bus service that helps take seniors to medical appointments, shopping, and recreational trips. So this contribution is provided in anticipation of the reduced parking. And they're going to be making the cash in lieu payment as well as this. And then there's also an additional voluntary agreement that the applicant is making with the Ridge Meadows Senior Society to provide a daily hot meal for 1 year to seniors who purchase a unit in the proposed development. And that sort of came out of the discussions with the Ridge Meadows Senior Society about the new bus service contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is the applicant planning to make a presentation or just available for questions?
The applicant is here. And yes.
Okay. So mover to the next council meeting, moved by Councillor Youssef, seconded by Councillor Tan, and any questions? Mayor Rumi.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm just trying to get some clarity on the accessibility. It was from 2 to 1.
Yes.
What exactly is that referring to?
It's the number of accessible parking spaces that will be provided as off-street parking.
That's what I thought.
So if they have 76 required parking spaces, they're required to have 2 accessible parking spaces, but they're required to have over that amount. So the 2 accessible parking spaces is what's required, but they're only proposing 75 parking spaces. So if 75 were required, then only 1 accessible parking space would be required.
I mean, when I look at the whole project, and I think it's commendable to be giving funds to the senior center for the improvement of quality of life and the meals. Can I assume that they're going to be targeting seniors for this residence?
Yes, that's correct. And maybe I'll defer to the applicant to speak to that.
Yes, it's our intention.
Could you please come to the microphone? Thank you.
Good morning, David Webster with McLean Homes. We've just found we built other buildings in the city center, and we found that this is just an ideal location for seniors. And in the buildings that we have built, it's been very, very successful in that because they can walk to everything. They can do all their shopping and there's no need for them to own an automobile. There's social available, the senior centers there. It just becomes a very good living environment for the seniors. And that's why we've targeted this market. And we just felt by creating this association with the senior center that we could further develop these suites to become more useful for seniors.
And I think that's great. I think that's something that we need to see. I am concerned that just having one accessible parking spot might be detrimental, because if you have a complex full of seniors,
Yes,
depending on their age range, there's mobility issues for quite a few of them, whether it be walking issues, whether it be parking. And we see people still, in their 80s driving their cars.
yes.
It can become a challenge if they don't have that accessibility. So I am concerned about that. And we'll see where that goes.
Yes.
I understand the need to drop the parking variance, and I'm kind of okay with that because
Yes.
not everybody's driving their cars. So my biggest concern is with the accessibility.
The second
Yeah.
accessible spot. Maybe it's something that can be looked at and worked in and on some basis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a follow-up question.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, it's not really a follow-up question. It's the second question.
Okay,
So there's a lane, where is the main entrance going to be here? Is it through the lanes in the back?
For the parking or for the building? The main entrance to the building is facing.
Oh,
on
yeah. So you're
125th.
driving your car. Where
Yes.
is it that you're getting into the building? Through the lane?
Through the lane, yes.
Through the lane?
Yes.
Okay. And is the lane big enough to?
Oh, the lane is
to-
fully developed in that area.
Fully developed?
Yes, there's already 2 new buildings in the area and the lane has been completed through to Edge Street. So yes, it's full width lane.
Thank you very much. That's all
Okay.
I have.
you're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, Counselor Schiller and then Counselor Carreras.
Thank you. Thank you to the chair and through you to the developer. I'll just sort of echo some of the mayor's comments. I do support a reduction in the overall number of parking spaces. I recognize it's a central location.
Yes.
And it's entirely possible that a number of residents won't need to own a car. But I do think if we're anticipating a lot of seniors to live in this building, that those seniors that do have a car may have more accessibility related needs than the average population. So I would actually rather see a couple more accessible parking spaces.
Yes.
Um,
Understandable.
just to support, the anticipated residents. And I see that you've done some outreach with the seniors center. Are there any design elements within the building that are sort of geared towards seniors specifically, just in terms of physical accessibility or the scooters that they often rely on?
The building are designed with accessible units. So yes, there are, some of the units do have accessibility, wider doors,
Okay.
more accessible bathrooms, lower light switches, various things. So if a person is handicapped and in a wheelchair, they do have these things available to them.
Okay, great. So you mentioned that's in some of the suites?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
Yes.
is
And
there a-
primarily in these smaller, units designed for the seniors, that's where the accessibility issues were designed to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Carreras.
Sort of just going off on what Councillor Schiller said, I'm just wondering if there's an expansion. So I understand these buildings are going to be targeted towards first-time buyers or younger buyers and seniors. And I'm wondering what else sort of is in the marketing or the design or the building that is going to be targeted towards seniors and young buyers. Because I think there is a shift happening in downtown Maple Ridge and there are more families moving into downtown Maple Ridge. So I'd like a little more of an explanation than just where it's located, justifying the high number of 1 bedrooms and studios and 0 3-bedrooms. Thank you.
The location is right downtown Maple Ridge. So it's, within walking distance to our facilities here. So you have access to the pools and the exercise areas, the community center. You have access to the seniors center. You have access to the Legion facilities that are offered. There's shopping directly across the street, the drugstore directly across the street, and many restaurants all within the downtown area, all that offer support services for seniors.
Thank you, but no real design, because I mean, honestly, community centers, pools, drugstore, shopping, restaurants are something that everyone is looking for, not just seniors and young buyers. Is there any design or changes that further sort of you're using as a marketing or a target to just look at seniors and young buyers?
No, I don't believe so.
Thank you.
Is that it, Councillor Carreras? Councillor Tan.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm just going to follow up on those comments, and I'm just curious about the because it is a significant reduction in
Yes.
from what our housing needs reports, to my understand. So I just want to really make sure I understand. Like we've touched on the seniors. I understand that there are some design elements in some of the suites,
Yes.
hand rails and somewhere the doorways and stuff. So this point about young buyers being the ones who are looking primarily for studio and 1-bedroom, do you have data to support that? Or because from my understanding of our housing needs reports that folks are looking for 2 and 3 bedrooms. So I'm struggling to understand here. So this justification.
Well, it comes down to, I think, two things. You have transportation, so that for young buyers, they're able to live within the city center and they're able to utilize public transport. We found this in some of our other buildings, that it is younger buyers that aren't able to afford to have a car and purchase a home. And so by living in the downtown core, they do have access to transportation, which makes it much easier for them. And these suites have been specially designed. The design of these suites is quite unique, that for a smaller unit, they're very livable. The bedroom has been redesigned with a door system that makes it much more effective for people to live in. And so for young people to live there, they have that advantage. Again, it's a little bit smaller, so of course the price comes down a little bit, and it becomes more affordable, say for a single person to afford it, or maybe they can't afford the cost of a 2-bedroom, because 2 bedrooms in Maple Ridge have become very expensive the last few years. So it's an affordability issue. You're trying to bring the price down, and you're trying to allow them to use public transport.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? I'm not seeing any, so all in favor of moving it forward to the next council meeting? It's carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Madam Clerk, 5.2, please.
Item 5.2, 2023-016 RZ 20,000 Stewart Crescent, second reading of zone amending bylaw 7908, 2023, and staff are in attendance to present the application.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. This application is for 2000 Stewart Crescent, requesting second reading to the zoning amendment bylaw 7908-2023. And the purpose of this application is to rezone the subject property from M3 Business Park Industrial to a site-specific CD zone to allow redevelopment and expansion of Iwan Moly Energy Facility to increase their manufacturing capacity of lithium battery. And the subject site is located at the intersection of Stewart Crescent, Maple Meadows Way, as well as Kingston Street in the Maple Meadows Business Park area of Hammond. The strategic location of this property is due to its proximity to Lougheed Highway, as well as Maple Meadows Way and West Coast Express Station. The property is currently designated Maple Meadows Business Park, which support the rezoning of the subject site for the expansion of this facility. And the subject site currently include a 1-story manufacturing warehouse building, including 2 levels of office space, which is mostly used by Iwan Moly Energy as their research and development facility. And the vehicular access to the site is currently from Maple Meadows Way, as well as Stewart Crescent and Kingston Street. The property is adjacent to other manufacturing and warehouse uses to the north, east, as well as south. This is the proposed site design. The applicant is proposing to construct a one-story manufacturing and warehouse building, including 2 levels of mezzanine space with a total area of approximately 61,000 square meters, a 7-story office building that is attached to the manufacturing portion with an area of around 9,100 square meters, and a standalone 5-story parking structure that will provide approximately 347 parking spaces. This facility is estimated to provide employment for approximately 584 staff, which is 6.8 times more than the current facility. Following grant of the first reading and due to the detailed design of the building and having a better understanding of the operational needs of this facility, the applicant is now proposing to increase the density by 0.4 FSR to the maximum density of 1.6 FSR, as well as increase building height of 5 meters up to a maximum building height of 35 meters. If council support this additional density as well as building height, the zoning amendment bylaw needs to be amended in order to reflect all these proposed changes. And the applicant has considered a number of major criteria in designing the building site as well as site design. One is the use of the sustainable materials such as mass timber in design of the office building, and designing energy efficient building that meets the energy step code, considering the pressing timeline in the construction through the use of precast concrete for the parking structure, and incorporating the First Nation and Indigenous artwork in the building design. The architects is trying to create a climate resilient development that incorporates some of the native planting in the landscaping, infiltration, bioswale, as well as extensive green roof, and also improving the public experience and staff experience by providing and incorporating accessibility criteria in the design of the building and site, and providing amenity areas wherever it's possible. The applicant is also requesting a number of variances. One is to the required off-street parking from 864 off-street parking to 351. Under the parking bylaw, the parking is calculated based on the floor area for manufacturing and office spaces. However, the applicant has provided a parking study that justifies that the maximum peak parking demand based on 1 parking per staff is 292, and the applicant is proposing 351 parking, which provides adequate parking for staff as well as visitors. The applicant is also proposing a number of TDM measures such as parking, transit pass subsidies, providing long-term and short-term bicycle parking and end-of-trip facilities within the facility, as well as providing incentive for staff to use public transit and carpooling. The applicant is also proposing variance to the subdivision and development servicing bylaw, including relaxing the requirement to dedicate corner truncation at the intersection of Stewart Crescent with Maple Meadows Way and Kingston Street. The purpose of this corner truncation dedication is to ensure unobstructed view for pedestrian vehicles as well as cyclists. However, the applicant indicated on all the drawings that within 7.5 meters from the intersection, no building structure or landscaping will have a height of more than 1 meter, in line with the visual clearance at the intersection requirement of the zoning bylaw. And the second variance is to relax the requirement to construct the sidewalk along property's frontage on Kingston Street. Currently, there is a sidewalk along Stewart Crescent and a multi-use path along Maple Meadows Way. There is also an existing sidewalk on the east side of Kingston Street. The applicant is proposing a exclusively truck access off of Kingston Street, and based on that is requesting to relax this requirement of constructing a sidewalk along property's frontage on Kingston. This is the rendering of the property indicating the manufacturing and industrial and manufacturing and warehouse building, which include extensive green roof, which is provided for the purpose of both stormwater management and amenity space for staff, a 7-story office building that is attached to the manufacturing building, and a standalone parking structure. This is the view of the office building from their entry plaza of Stewart Crescent. This is the truck access off Kingston Street to the loading area and the manufacturing. And this is showing the office on the right side and the parking structure to the left. And this is the view of the warehouse and industrial building from Maple Meadows Way that shows the incorporated artwork from First Nation and Indigenous people and as part of the value added to this development. And that's the elevation of the building from Stewart Crescent. This report includes all the recommendation, including granting the second reading and forwarding this application to public hearing, as well as proceeding to final adoption upon meeting all the terms and conditions that has been provided in detail in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a motion to move it forward. Councillor Youssef, seconded by Mayor Rumi. Any questions? Mayor Rumi.
Thank you very much, and realize the importance of this project to the city. My question is more along the lines with parking and traffic. With so many cars, and I'm just trying to picture this in my mind. And I know people get hung up on the Stewart Crescent where the train is, and that backs everything up. Is there how will that impact that area, or is there another way out for them that we're encouraging them to go a different route so that it's not contributing to the overall traffic? It'll be a lot of cars for sure.
Sure. Through Madam Chair, if it's okay, I wanted to defer this to our Director of Engineering.
Yeah, absolutely. And so over the last couple of years, we spent considerable efforts analyzing this area of the neighborhood. And there's a number of industrial developments on our horizon in this neighborhood. And so we understand what those traffic impacts are. As part of this application, we have asked that they spend some additional time on that intersection of Stewart Crescent and 113B Avenue to determine how we can improve the efficiencies for that intersection. But looking at this at a bigger picture, at a higher level, this is why we continue to strongly advocate to TransLink for the Golden Ears Way widening. And so what we're trying to do is keep as much of that regional traffic up onto the Golden Ears Way. So we have less traffic on 113B to free up capacity for these industrial developments. So kind of a two-pronged approach, both very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Okay. Any other questions?
Councilor Carreras.
Councillor Carreras.
Thank you. I just want to go back to Kingston and the relaxation of the sidewalks. What exactly does that mean? And I think it may have shown it in one of the renderings.
Through Madam Chair, just go back to the, oops. So right now there is an existing sidewalk on a Stewart Crescent and a multipath on Maple Meadows Way. And there is an existing sidewalk on the east side of Kingston Street, not fronting the property, but on the other side. The applicant, so the applicant is proposing vehicular and pedestrian access off Stewart Crescent. And the access on Kingston Street is just only for truck access to access the loading area. So it's not anticipated that there would be any staff using the sidewalk along the property line, because there is also a physical separation between the vehicular access provided off of Stewart Crescent and the one on Kingston Street. There won't be any possibility that, you know, cars can enter from Stewart Crescent and exit from Kingston Street. There is a sidewalk proposed along the parking structure. However, it's based on the use and the access is anticipated that there will be minimal need for pedestrian or a staff using the sidewalk along the property line, and they will be able to use the sidewalk on the east side of Kingston Street.
Okay, so just because I've spent a lot of time doing lunchtime loops in this area, I know that this area is accessed quite a bit for a lot of people taking a stretch their legs at lunchtime. So there is the sidewalk on the east side, and there's a crosswalk, right, from the Stewart Crescent sidewalk to the east side of Kingston, right? And then are there any other crosswalks until you get to 203 on Kingston?
Through Madam Chair, can I defer this to transportation?
So I can certainly look that up. I don't have that at my fingertips. I don't know if Ms. Ollenberger would like to speak to any more about the crosswalk, because engineering has been involved in this discussion and this recommendation going forward. So I don't know if you want to add.
So and it'll just be that chunk that will have no sidewalk on the west. If you go further south on Kingston on the west, if I've got my directions correct, there's still the continuation of the sidewalk because there already is a sidewalk there, if I remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the sidewalk is continuous on Kingston Street on the east side. And so there is no sidewalk currently on the west side. And we're just suggesting that approach remain consistent with the current configuration.
All right, thank you. I just want to make sure there's still like accessible walking paths, from transit or, and there should be from transit if they're taking Maple Meadows being the hub closest, and that there is the ability to still continue to do a loop because there is that great multi-use path in between the building and Maple Meadows Way. It goes all the way around. Okay, thanks.
Just from the engineering aspect to that, we can ensure that there's adequate crossings between the multi-use path to the west and Kingston sidewalk to the east. So you can continue to do that loop. We'll make sure that is part of this process.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor of moving this forward to the next council meeting? Opposed? Carried. 5.3, Madam Clerk.
Item 5.3, 2023-059 VP for 28304 96th Avenue, and it's a development variance permit, and staff are in attendance to present the application.
Madam Chair, last but not least, this is a small variance application for the above noted property on 96th Avenue that's designated rural residential, zoned RS3 residential, detached rural residential. Site area is 0.8 acres, and the variance is to reduce the interior west side lot line setback from 1.5 to 1.38 meters to allow the existing building to be retained. This is the subject property here. And this is the ortho photo showing the property. And the variance is basically to reduce the interior west side property line. Council may recall that this had a rezoning that completed just on the 25th of July to rezone all of this property, the west part from P4 to RS3 zone. This is an existing building, and this is basically a minor housekeeping item. Now that there's an existing building to reduce the setback from the 1.5 meters to the 1.38 meters or 4.5 from the property line. And that just allows the building to remain in its existing condition and be compliant with the current zoning bylaw before it was grandfathered or legacied, so to speak. There's no changes to the site otherwise. And the variance resolution is in front of you, Madam Chair and Committee.
Thank you very much. Can I have a motion to move it forward? Councillor Youssef, seconded by Councillor Schiller. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? All in favor, opposed, carried. Thank you very much. And moving on to engineering services, item 6.1.
Item 6.1, strategic transportation plan endorsement, and staff are in attendance to present that to council.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Your Worship, members of council, for the opportunity to speak about the transportation plan today. So before we get started, I'd like to provide a brief introduction to Allison Clavel sitting on the side here. She may join us if you have any technical questions about the report. Allison is a principal of urban systems and instrumental in getting us to this stage today. So as you know, we have a pretty brief agenda today. We'll talk a little bit about high-level overview of the plan. We're going to identify some changes that have occurred since we last met with you on July 11th. And then as per standard there'll be a recommendation as well. I believe this will be back hopefully to council on the 26th with regular. So moving forward, just a brief overview of the plan development that's occurred to date. The first phase was really about launching a work plan, identifying that, working that through with council. We met with council in the end of the first deliverable, which was existing and future conditions. That really talked about where we are today within the transportation network. Within this level of analysis, we also took that equitable lens approach. So we kind of looked at the city from a demographics perspective of how it was configured, and that really helped inform us as part of developing the plan. We also worked and calibrated a regional transportation model to really understand how the system of transportation network is performing today, and that really helped us project forward as we looked at options for improvements. The third phase was really, where do we want to go? How does the city want to move forward with transportation? We had an extensive engagement with the community at this phase. We met with regional committees as well, and that really helped set us forward with a new direction, really looking at all active modes and really redundancy within our transportation network from a goods movement perspective as well. And redundancy really is a key to moving forward with congestion management. So we identified that and had a lot of discussions with the public. So redundancy is not just about vehicle lanes and travel lanes, it's about active modes and providing access to transit, and how is our community working forward and providing land use in appropriate locations. We move forward into phase 4, which is really about plan development. So what is the plan? What do we want to see and how are we going to move it forward? This was the main bulk of the plan, and we came back in July of 2022 and presented that to council in a draft form. And that really set out 7 chapters, and we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. And then we came back with a draft of implementation plan the following year, and that really helped us look at all the costing associated with the plan. And we met on July 11th. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in some of the subsequent slides. And we're here today with a recommendation for endorsement. Oh, sorry. I'll speak a little closer there. So the plan really consists of 7 chapters. You can see in the green circles located there. It also includes 18 strategies and 71 corresponding actions. So it's an action-oriented plan that was derived early in the plan development, that we wanted something that wasn't so much focused on policy, but really focused on what are the projects that we need to complete and when do we want to complete those projects. So this section here is really talking about what we talked about on July 11th. So we'll provide a brief overview. So there's a lot of questions about transportation targets and why are there not climate action related targets within the strategic transportation plan. And that has occurred in some of our previous plans. And really one of the main rationales behind that, we had discussions about the climate action plan and how that's being developed, really looking at when we're thinking about targets, how does that relate to land use and all the other corresponding master plans and community plans the city's working on. We also had a conversation about how to monitor the plan. What's the most effective way to touch base with council and how do we move forward? And we'll provide a little bit more of an explanation on that. We also talked about accessibility and inclusion and an equitable lens and how this plan was developed. And really we'll to move it forward, really to make sure that it has access for everyone. There was a lot of discussion about further emphasis on cycling infrastructure, and we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. And then we had a discussion about managing corridor congestion and what are the best practices in relation to that. So when we were looking at transportation targets, we really understood quickly on in this process through the help of Allison that when we're looking at developing a target for climate action or reducing greenhouse gases or reducing vehicle kilometers driven per person, it does relate to a lot of other community processes that are going on within the organization and master plans. So we really will be leaning towards the climate action plan, and we developed the strategic plan to kind of correspond with that. So if council chooses to accelerate any targets, we have the plan in place to pull the appropriate levers and mechanisms to help deliver upon the approach that's within the climate action plan. We also talked quite a bit about monitoring progress. So how is the plan going to move forward, and how are we going to touch base with council? There were two key instruments that we mentioned at the meeting. One is the TransLink trip diary. It's completed every 5 years, and it's a fairly comprehensive assessment of how people are moving around in the community for work trips and for recreational trips. And we are fortunate that this year in the fall, TransLink will be updating the TransLink trip diary. So it sort of gives us a year zero baseline for us to work off of, which is great news. I know I mentioned it earlier, but really we learned that through business planning, it will provide staff and council the opportunity to have ongoing dialogue and how things are moving forward and how we're reaching the objectives identified in the strategic transportation plan, and allow us to pivot quite quickly to move forward key projects and initiatives as the city continues to grow. So we anticipate monitoring progress to be on an annual basis through that existing program. Accessibility and inclusion, we had some conversations with council on July 11th, and it seemed that a lot of the conversations seem to be related to, we don't understand where this is within the plan, and how do we flush that out? How do we make that more understandable? So we've worked with Allison, and we've added in a few boxes and identifiers and some new paragraphs within the document itself to explain the process that we went through to get to where we are today. And it's really identifying that equitable lens. We were very fortunate with the way that the land use within Maple Ridge is set up and our demographics, that a lot of the lower income locations and senior locations are within the city center, which has a lot of complements. We want to serve that through a lot of active modes and provide access to transit, which really works well with the corresponding land use and density within that location. So we sort of flushed that out a little bit more in the new version that you're seeing today. We had a lot of conversation about how are we going to move forward with cycling infrastructure? What are the gaps within our network today? And how does this plan address those gaps? In response to that, we had some discussions and identified that even with the 10-year plan at that time, there still were gaps that were not addressed within that window. And so we've followed up in this area, and we've increased the amount of cycling infrastructure within this plan. So on the map that's provided here, you can see the key corridors. So all of those will include cycling infrastructure. And we've increased our cycling from about 35 kilometers on existing roadways to 60. So that's a substantial shift that we're seeing. And that does not include new roadways that we'll be building, such as 240th Street and the Abernathy extension, because they'll be a complement to developing those key corridors as they move forward in the future. So it's a substantial increase, and the active transportation component of the plan is identified. Just going to go back. Speaking on active transportation, we did some minor tweaks and changes to the pedestrian element as well, just in response to looking at our key performance indicators and the amount of requests that we're seeing for pedestrian crossing facilities. So we need to anticipate for that in the future. So there's a little bit of a tweak there. It was only about $500,000, I believe. So there's some other minor changes, but the real main component was in the key corridors and moving that forward into the implementation and the cycling infrastructure. We talked quite a bit about managing corridor congestion and how does the wording within the plan identify that? So we went back into the plan and we just sort of flushed that out a little bit more. And we talked about the complements of active modes, about providing high quality transit and how that helps with managing congestion. We also really focused on how is redundancy within the networks, as I mentioned earlier, going to help complement this key area as well. So really, when we're looking at managing corridor congestion, there are some big ideas out that, hey, we shouldn't build any more roadways because if we build more, we'll induce more vehicles, which is fair within highly urban environments. We are in a bit of a suburban environment where our municipality is maturing. So we do identify that there are some key corridors that we need to expand out to create that key network that will provide that redundancy. In addition to that redundancy, we need to provide that option or that redundancy for active modes. So we flushed that out through a few sections of the report. And all of that relates to implementation. So looking at that and looking at our costing sheets and sort of making sure that what we've identified makes sense. So we have identified that really we're looking at an investment of approximately $685 million throughout the duration of the plan. So one of the things we really want to make clear to council is that is sort of the build out. We anticipate, hopefully we can finish this within about a 30-year window. A lot of that has to do with how this area develops, how the community grows. So how do developers come along and we change frontages and corresponds to that. So DCCs is a huge component of this. Streetscape frontages will be picking up a large portion of these costs. And we also know that every 30 to 60 years, we have to go back into these roadways and rip them apart and go underground and fix utilities. And so when we fix utilities and we're taking out that infrastructure, we have to put everything back. So with a strategic plan, we already have the plan identified of how we want the new road configuration to occur. So the costs are fairly minimized. So a lot of these costs will be picked up through the utility component as well. In the short term, we've increased our expenditures to $330 million as well. So it's a fairly aggressive plan moving forward and focusing quite a bit on key corridors and the active component as well. So above is a map that provides an overview of our short-term transportation projects. One of the things we also noted that is not identified in here is these maps are really challenging to read. And we had a discussion about the size of Maple Ridge, and putting everything on one map provides a lot of value. Yet when you do that, it's quite hard to read. So we will be putting in a web map. So within our website, we'll have an embedded button that you can press and you can view each one of these within layers and understand what transportation projects are identified by mode and by timeline. So you can look into them in a little bit more detail. This provides a bit of an overview of what we're planning over the next 10 years. And with that, as identified within the report, we have a recommendation for the SDP to be endorsed in principle.
Thank you very much. Motion to move it forward. Councillor Youssef, second by Mayor Rumi. Any questions? Councillor Tan.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the updates on how our feedback from last time was shaped and planned. I can really see that, the change in the updates there. So thank you for that. So a few things here. I just want to make sure I understand, just the first time going through a strategic transportation plan. So through Madam Chair, in the presentation, we talked about the emphasis on reducing congestion through reducing vehicle kilometers traveled. Can you help me flesh out where is that in the plan? Is that a central component of the plan that reducing VKT is the approach for that sort of urban trips?
Yes, through the chair, we have a few sections within the report that I can identify where we included that.
Maybe I'll just step in while Mark's looking for those sections. And so that was one of the principles that we identified early on in this project, was about and really it resonated back to that the initial feedback we got from the public was one of the things we heard certainly was congestion. We heard about that equity, about that increased pedestrian opportunity, especially in the town center, and then those cycling connections. And so all three of those work together to when we consider reducing that congestion, limiting the vehicles traveled by kilometer per motor vehicle, and trying to shift that mode mode over to alternative modes. Right now, our alternative mode split is quite low. And so we have lots of area for improvement to get people into some of those walking trips and those cycling trips. And so I think you'll see throughout a number of the goals within the plan and other of the actions within the plans embed that principle. And so a lot of this is about providing options to people about how they could get around the community. And then maybe I'll turn it back over to Mr. Helpin and Mrs. Clavel.
Hi, through the chair. I think the goals we identified for your community as safe and effective, sustainable, accessible, reliable transportation network, those are, we know, fundamentally possible through reducing VKT. That is how we get to those things. And one of the ways we pulled that out in this version of the plan, if you look at the second last paragraph in section 3.1, we actually give a more fulsome explanation of how those things are related to vehicle kilometers traveled and how those all kind of work holistically to achieve the goals, including reducing greenhouse gas emissions. There's two main routes to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through transportation. One is electrification, and the other is the reduction of vehicle kilometers traveled. So we do kind of get into that. We don't want to write whole reams about it, but we did include a paragraph that specifically kind of fleshes that out for folks so they can understand those relationships.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And so the reason why I asked these questions is I just want to make sure that we have through the presentation, I think it was quite clear there was a large focus on reducing vehicle kilometers travel. And then when I look at, section 3.1 there, I see like sort of a paragraph where I sort of fleshes that out where, achieving the goals would lead to reducing VKT where I don't see sort of that focus on we need to reduce VKT, as we talked about with VKT has increased. And when I look at the goals and the vision, it's a lot of, residents can, and all parties can comfortably use their mode of choice. It's efficient, it's connected, it's safe. It doesn't necessarily spell out to me this. When I look at this, I don't see a focus on reducing VKT, which I think that we've talked about in previous sessions. So for me, that plan doesn't I don't see that emphasis translated to necessarily translate as strongly in the presentation as it comes to the plan. And the reason why I'm sort of putting an emphasis on this is because I think it provides that overall context as we've shaped the implementation plan. I wouldn't want that emphasis to come out in the presentation to council, but then be lost sort of as we sort of go down the line, say like 4 or 6 years later. What can we do? Sort of as a new person, rookie, I'm just trying to understand how we shape this STP during the final phase. Like how do we do that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In past strategic transportation plans over, say, the last 15 years, that's been a real focus. Like, how does the transportation plan complement that? We've really seen an evolution of the climate action plans coming into fruition. And sometimes what can happen is if the STP itself is very specific language, like this is what transportation is going to do, then people will kind of put all their ownership on the transportation network and the decisions with respect to transportation to handle GHGs, because it seems logical that it should all be within that portfolio. But what we really found is climate action plans have come along and they've actually changed those objectives and those goals, and they've been a bit different. So you can have two city documents that are not really complementary because maybe they were developed at different points in time. And so when we developed the SDP, we identified, hey, this should be really an action-oriented plan. And this has the ability for us to work and say, hey, this is what we think we need to do. These are the priorities. And then in correspondence to other levers that are occurring in the city, such as a climate action plan that we're working on right now, or community plans, we can kind of pull the strings and move things around a bit with this. So it helps us achieve those same objectives. So we are a little bit, we didn't really set exactly the targets or sort of how we're going to move forward. We just identified that this will help us get to where we want to go. And I think once we see the climate action plan, in addition to this, it'll really provide that wholesome lens to really help us as the city move forward to meet those objectives. Does that help? I see.
And I think my time, we could dive into that, but I think my time is up here.
Maybe do you mind if I add to that, Chair?
I was just going to remind Councillor Tan, some of this is comments more than questions. So it's important that get the questions of clarification so that at the council meeting, you have the information you need to give your commentary on that. Because we're getting into a little bit of the weeds where the questions is what we need right now.
Thanks, Madam Chair. That's a
But
good
carry
reminder.
on, because the time is up. Okay. All right, well, I'll come back to you.
Is it possible just to
Yes.
tag on to that response? And so I just want to identify this is a very fulsome strategic transportation plan. It has, from what we anticipate and from our discussions with the public and our advice from our consultant, has all the projects that we need to construct in the next 30 years to have a fulsome transportation network. So the plan itself is very fulsome. The discussion about vehicle kilometers traveled is as much a transportation discussion as it is a land use discussion. And so that's why we don't have necessarily that strong linkage of forcing in this. What we're doing is we're making sure we build out the network so we can accommodate that reduction in vehicle kilometers traveled as part of our plan. But in the future, we have a land use plan, and then we also have our climate action plan. And all three of those plans will determine how many vehicle kilometers we travel on a daily basis. And so we're going to all have those work together. And then that's where we can come up with those targets as an organizational level. And so it very well could be that council, as part of their next steps through considering the land use plan, the climate plan, and the STP, put in a target about vehicle kilometer travel that lives outside of the strategic transportation plan, because there's more plans that touch it. And so that's the approach that we've taken for putting this together. And I think it will meet the objectives of council going forward. Thank you.
All right, so I will come back to you, but Councillor Schiller and then Councillor Carreras after that. Thank you.
Thank you thank you very much, Chair, and through you to staff. I'm very happy to see this update of the plan. I very much feel that it does reflect the discussions that I was here for, and specifically this significant increase in the plans for cycling really does make me feel that this is a plan I can support. I do have a couple of specific questions. So when I think about the cycling lanes, I suspect that, 15, 20 years ago, we probably weren't talking about them as much as we were now. And so, in many ways, it's kind of new concepts and new language. And I find myself sometimes picturing one thing in my mind and then the reality being something different, not better or worse, but just different, because I think we're all kind of learning how this stuff works. So one resource that I've learned about recently is the BC Active Transportation Guide that's provided by the provincial government. Is that something that as an organization we're committed to following? I'd just like to hear a little bit more from staff about how that informs the decisions about how some of this infrastructure is designed.
We're through the chair. We're both excited about that document as well. So we're looking at each other. Who should speak to it? Yeah, it's an excellent document. It provides a lot of guidance for staff. It has some design matrix tools that really help us determine what type of facility can fit within any specific location. So we do reference that quite a bit within the document itself. And even in the long-term cycling plan, you'll see a lot of thick purple lines, and those are to be identified as AAA as per the BC Active Transportation Design Guide. So as we go into each project, we'll be referring to that document to determine exactly what type of facility can fit within the right of way and within the planned horizon years.
Great, thank you very much. And then the other part I just wanted to touch on is, again, I'm very supportive of the plan. We can plan all day, but what really matters is when we allocate some resources to the plan. So when it comes to the fall and business planning, will we sort of have these, I'm focused on the cycling infrastructure specifically, will these sort of projects come forward to us as a list of, on this street, we're planning on building this, or can I just get a better understanding of sort of what will come forward so I know what to look for?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're working through what those deliverables are going to look like for council at organizational level. But typically at a minimum, they will certainly have a project list with those projects identified, what the locations are and what the dollar value assigned to them are going to be. But we're working to enhance some of that process with council. And so we'll definitely have those discussions about what's in there, and we can highlight what we pulled out of the STP as projects going forward. So council knows what our investment looks like over the next couple of years, because we're aimed at 330 million over 10 years, which is a very sizable investment. And so we got to start getting our foot in the door and start putting some funding aside to do some of this work. But that's all part of those discussions as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I just find that having an understanding of specific projects is very helpful when speaking with the public as well, and sort of being able to refer to specific examples. And what I would also like to see, if possible, is just sort of a comparison to what we've spent, say, you know, this is what we spent last year, and this is what we're looking at for this year, just so that that's just a metric that I can see, like, yes, okay, progress, is being made, and that would just be helpful to me. Thank you.
Absolutely. We can make sure that information is available to council.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carreras.
Thank you. It's really exciting to have this project come back to us, and almost at the very, very end. I remember when it was at the very, very beginning of this process. I just had a quick question, page 57 of the Urban Systems Report, and it's referring to figure 4.9, which is the long-term transit network. So I just want to clarify that this is based off of the long-term plan from TransLink. Is that just reflective of that?
Yes, through the chair. This is reflective of the Ridge Meadows Transportation Plan, the area transport plan that was approved, and also Transport 2050.
Okay. So my only question is around this sort of big area that we've got a bunch of projects ongoing that is still void of any future TransLink area, and that's the 112 Avenue just east of 240th. And I think we talked about this at the last meeting. Is there any ability to identify that this, although it may not be in the TransLink plan, that this should have some future looking transit options?
Through the chair, are we referring to the Northeast Albion area? Is that?
I'm looking at figure 4.9. It's the long-term transit network. It's on page 57 of the Urban Systems Report. I'm sorry, we don't have pages of our package, so I don't actually know what page it is in the package. But it shows like the rapid bus, it's a map, and it has the rapid bus, it has the 15-minute or better fixed route, and it has the fixed route for bus transit service, so frequently to be decided. And I'm just wondering because we've approved these big projects going in on like east on 112, the Conecuh Springs, there is a school going in there, but we're not identifying any future need for transit, whether it's approved or not by TransLink. We're just not showing anything. And I'm wondering why we're not even looking at that area as expansion anytime in the next 30 years.
Through the chair, we are working with Transport 2050, and they've identified, even through their 10-year plan, to increase bus serviceable hours considerably within Maple Ridge. So we'll have ongoing discussions as this area develops. The area transport plan didn't truly coincide with this timeline, so it is a bit of a gap with here. So we are working with TransLink to see if we can address that as that area continues to grow.
Is there no way to identify in this plan? Sorry, you may be going into it and I cut you off. I'll let you finish what you're going to say. And sorry.
No. And we also do have action 5.11 support TransLink and Metro Vancouver priorities to align with the transportation network. So for people that live within that area. So it is identified as something that we'll continue to work with as we have new areas that develops. Maple Ridge is evolving. So the area plans were the transit plan was developed with TransLink, but we'll constantly work to revise that.
Yeah, and I guess that's just the void areas. We know we're doing expansion there. And I'm wondering if there's any way to identify, though this may not be in the TransLink plan because they haven't approved it. It is something that we as a community know we'll need to continue to address and look at as we grow up there.
Through the chair, it may be helpful to think of that map on figure 4.9 as kind of a baseline, not it is the long-term transportation plan, but it's the long-term that's currently on the books. Action 5.1.1 identifies that there's a desire to have most residents live within 400 meters of transit. So that's the trigger to continue the conversations with TransLink beyond what's physically on the map that's currently being agreed upon for the long term, which is based on current population locations and increasing service levels to where we already know there are people.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps you.
Maybe if I could just layer on top of that. And so in agreement with what our speakers have said, but it may be just to set the stage. And so the area transportation or area transport plan moved forward in 2018, 2019. And so we are now 4 years out of that plan. I think given the amount of growth that we anticipate in our community, we should continue to revise that plan every 5 to 7 years. And so we're coming up on the start of trying to think about initiating that process again. I wouldn't necessarily go and recommend making changes to it for an area that we are thinking about currently today about densifying. We may have density increases across the community in other pockets of neighborhoods that need to be considered as well. And so I would suggest be appropriate to move forward with what we have in the plan because that's based upon the ATP previously, but maybe we should start thinking about the steps to start a new one. And then we can consider all areas across the city as for further transit expansion. Just so we're doing a consistent approach through it, knowing that we are densifying in a number of neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. That helps. And again, the 5.11 sort of is our sort of guide there. It's just the community just looks at maps and then they wonder why there's nothing happening anywhere. Thank you. I do love a plan that comes back every 5 to 7 years. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I go to second round, anyone, Councillor Youssef or Mayor Ruman, do you have any questions? Okay, so Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just on the process side, I'm wondering if I think the thing that gives me the most pause is I'm seeing this as two separate things. One is the strategic transportation plan in terms of the words on the page, and the second part is the implementation plan that we're also being asked to endorse. And I think it's when I looked at implementation plan for me, it was a lot of small print in a spreadsheet. And it was quite hard for me to follow, actually. And I wonder, from a process point of view, is there a possibility where we can have sort of separate presentations on the transit, cycling, walking, where we can then dive in deep with our specific questions around those fronts in terms of future projections and individual projects, design guidelines? Because I would love to see this I would love to see this sort of go through sort of that so that we can sort of move on. But I just want to make sure that I'm comfortable with each specific thing. And I don't have that comfort of being able to endorse an implementation plan in principle when I don't necessarily can't see it, can't necessarily understand it, understand specifics. And I'm not really interested in sort of taking them all this time, to go through the specifics of each project. No. What can we do here?
That's a great question. And the implementation plan is certainly aggressive. And so really the important part today and potentially on this September 26th is that we can endorse the strategic transportation plan in principle. The next piece to that is the implementation. We tried to give you a vision for what our implementation is now. It's very fulsome. It will have budget dependencies and potentially budget constraints, but we're setting the stage for those discussions with council during business planning. And each year when we come forward for business planning, when we do our capital plan, we're going to give consideration to what the implementation plan of the STP is moving forward. So each year we should have those discussions about do we have enough pedestrian facilities coming forward? Do we have the right cycling projects identified? We can have that as those projects come forward, like as an implementation plan for council each year. And so I see them as different documents, but we didn't want to give you a strategic plan without a vision as to how we would recommend that we implement it. This is our first kick at it. It's fulsome. We're going to have further discussion on it in future.
And I'm just going to turn it to the CAO just for some further comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just following up on Mr. Smith's comments, this is a similar approach that Council's taken with the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, the Fire Master Plan, and the STP. And this allows us to get all the puzzle pieces on the board and then allowing staff through our upcoming business planning process and our update to council on our objectives and key results to allow us to get a little more dynamic on some of the individual pieces as we move the whole conversation forward corporately. So what we don't want to do is have one area of the organization that's in front of the other because of the things that we need to talk about around the integration of RCMP, around the increases of fire support and suppression in Maple Ridge, into development of swimming pools and hockey rinks and sport fields, as well as bicycling and cycling lanes, the Abernathy corridor, the 240th bridge, industrial lands, all of that is part of this bigger picture. So what is in front of council today is a recommendation to move this to adoption and approval next week, which allows, or not next week, the following week, but allows staff to start putting together the operational plans and the business plans that you need to fund the recommendations that are in the report. And that's gonna funnel out into multiple years of funding requests and impact on taxes and capital. I hope that helps clarify.
Thank you.
That's useful. Thank you, Mr. Hartman. I think that helps. I think that sort of process piece helps, and I think I like that sort of, and that gives me sort of a lead in. So I reiterate my desire to have more fulsome conversations on all those pieces, and I'd like to emphasize that. I think just moving on to the next thing, I just want to understand the accessibility pieces. Thank you for the language in the piece, and so sort of similar to those, like in terms of implementation. When I was thinking about accessibility last time when we talked as well, I was thinking about things like specifically like sidewalk let downs, so folks, you know, the mobility devices and wheelchairs can sort of get around. And I saw that a lot of the languages around stuff, equity around neighborhoods, which is fantastic as well. So at what point in this process or in an implementation do we build out an accessibility plan for transportation?
Through the chair, just to clarify, the sidewalk letdown component we're working on right now. So that was recommended in section 3 of the report, 3.1.2. Yeah, I believe it talks about updating our subdivision servicing bylaw. And that's an ongoing document that's changing all the time. As we learn new things, we're actually updating it right now with some new provisions for sidewalk letdowns as per the BC Active Transportation Design Guide. So we'll continue to do that work ongoing. And as we learn more about active transportation infrastructure and how it can be integrated into our right of way, we'll come up with new drawing sets for developers and so forth to move forward with that active and inclusive environment that we're all seeking.
Thank you. I think it's helpful. And I think maybe like the opinion on that is that I would love to see, just speaking personally, I would love to see a more fulsome staff presentation report and understanding of where we are with that. And that can come at a separate time. I just have a last question about goals and targets, Madam Chair. Is that permissible now? Or?
Yeah, but go ahead, because I don't see any other speakers. The last question.
Perfect. Thank you. So just making sure I understand around the goals and targets around this, I heard the data will come with the TransLink trip diaries. And I heard there was a once every 5 years. And then also business planning, we have an update on the network and so of all the different networks. But the thing that flagged me for concern was that if we get metrics for a sort of mode share once every 5 years, like that's quite a gap here. Is there, and that doesn't necessarily lead to fulsome conversation about what we need to accelerate. Is there a way for us to accelerate that data sort of gathering so that we can have a sort of database conversation during business planning?
Through the chair, there's 2 main sources for key metrics. So there's StatsCan through the census data. So that is very helpful as well. And that's once every 4 years. And then we really kind of dive into a little bit more detail with the TransLink data. So for the transportation people, we really like it because it helps us kind of see how everyone's moving around Metro Vancouver and what type of modes and so forth. So that data is really helpful for us, but it does take time. Like I know we want everything to happen right away, but if we started even monitoring this once every 2 years, I don't think we'd even see that jump. We need to have an adequate gap, and TransLink has determined that to be every 5 years. So it's very helpful for us, and it's quite a survey. They put in quite a lot of hours into making this work. So I think that'd be more of a conversation at the mayor's council to say, hey, should we improve the progress of this to once every 3 years or so, for example, to see if we can get that data a little bit sooner.
The other item, just to layer on top of that, And I agree with Mr. Halpin on the monitoring side of things, but the other piece of council's looking for quick numbers on a certain piece of infrastructure. We can always certainly start talking about putting in ped counters or cyclist counters, but that's going to tell you on one route how successful it's been. It's not going to tell you your mode share because you're not monitoring across the entire city. But if we're looking for just, was that effective and did we get people out on their bikes or people out walking, we can certainly do something like that.
Through the chair, one more.
I would say there are some things that we can monitor annually. One thing is TransLink has good ridership data that comes annually. So transit use is relatively easy to monitor on a more frequent basis. I have personally been involved in the design and implementation of household surveys, which is how you get that more rounded trip diary data. And it is a very extensive, very expensive process. So when TransLink does it, it takes them more than a year just to process that data from the start of the survey to the end.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. Okay, I'm not seeing any further questions. So all in favor of moving this forward to the next council meeting? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. And item number 7, corporate services, Madam Clerk.
Item 7.1, 05-1970-04. It's the 2024 to 2027 permissive tax exemptions, and staff are in attendance to answer any questions from council.
Okay, so could I have a mover to move it forward, please? Moved by Councillor Schiller, seconded by Councillor Youssef. Any questions of council for staff? Not seeing any? You're off the hook. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. And 9.1.
Item 9.1 is the Maple Ridge Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy bylaw. And this is just to update the current bylaw and make some changes to the designation of the head and protection of information and clarify fees.
And no presentation. So I have a mover moved by Councillor Youssef, second by Councillor Schiller. Any questions? Not seeing any. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. And the next item is 9.2.
9.2 is the policy governance framework, and this is a new policy to update the one that was in place since 2009. And it's a new framework that establishes legislative services as a department that reviews and streamlines the policy development for the city.
Okay. Councillor Youssef is moving it forward, seconded by Councillor Tan. Any questions? Councillor Carreras.
Thank you. Just a quick question on this. I believe the last policy had language in it where each year in January, they would present a plan for the next year, a policy that was being reviewed. And I don't think I remember seeing that in the new policy. I'm just curious if that's been removed and why it's been removed.
Currently, the review process, as I understand it, is it's a review every 24 months after a policy is in place, and then staff would review it again 24 months. So in terms of an annual review, I'll have to refer to staff on that.
Okay. Who's going to come to the podium, please?
Madam Chair, just in regards to this new policy, the intention is to review all policies that are currently in existence as apologies. So in terms of that language being removed, the policies are going to be reviewed on a 24-month basis.
Okay, so just on that piece, the further question I have is when it's first brought in, it looks like there's a 24-month trigger to review new policies. And then there's another trigger to review it 24 months after, but then there's nothing after that. So if you review, a new policy gets reviewed at 2 years and then it gets reviewed again in another 2 years, but then after 4 years, it doesn't look like there's any check-in review.
So just in terms of that, staff do have the opportunity to be able to review it on an interim basis if there's issues that do come up. So the policy does allow for that. But part of my role would be to review them annually to make sure that if there are any issues, then those could be flagged for staff as well.
Okay. And then just to reference to my first question around a presentation to council to let us know what was the work that was being done in that coming year. I do think that's still relevant for us to know what policy is being reviewed in the current year. And I mean, these are comments I'll move to when we do this at council, but I think it's still important language. And I guess for me, the biggest thing for me that I'm looking in a policy, I mean, the rest of it I quite like, is that there is a trigger that nothing sits there where we see policy sit for 10, 15 years and nobody's looked at it, reviewed it, updated. I just want to make sure that doesn't get lost in this. And I think I'm just still seeing that piece miss. I'm wondering if the periodic review under number 4 just needs one more line that after 4 years, there's still a trigger to bring it forward every 4 years. So it doesn't just get a 4-year review and then sit for 10.
Understood. That's something that we could definitely take a look at just to make sure that that language is in there so that we're covered in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions?
Oh, I just have one more question, actually, sorry. Under Schedule B, the 4 bullet point down. So now I'm looking at Schedule B, which is, this is the old one, right?
Yes, that is.
Yes, okay. Perfect. Just want to make sure I'm looking at the right thing here because it's in here a few times. Thank you. I'm done now.
Thank you.
Right. Great. All in favor of moving it forward? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. All right, thank you very much. And now moving on to community forum.
Item 10, community forum. Participants in the community forum are reminded that there should be no discussion of public hearing bylaws which have not yet reached conclusion. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak to council. A second opportunity may be provided once all speakers in the queue have had an opportunity to speak. Total time allotted is 15 minutes. If you wish to inquire about additional opportunities to address council, please contact the corporate officer. So for members of the public who would like to speak during the forum, clearly state your name and city of residence before beginning your comments. And if you're participating electronically, please use the raised hand icon. And when you're called upon, please turn on your camera. And for those attending in person, please come forward to the podium when the chair invites speakers.
All right. So I'm not seeing anyone in the audience, and I believe there isn't anybody online from what I can see, but can we just clarify?
No one online.
I'm correct. All right, so we will move on to adjournment. We're adjourned at 12:29, and are we still going to do a 15-minute break and then proceed? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to come back at 1:45. Thank you very much.
Thanks.